Hey everybody, welcome to a life group video. As always, Anthony, Connections Director, here with me. I got some friends, starting right here.
Jessica Paradiso.
And what do you do here at the church?
I am admin to children's ministry.
Beautiful.
And I am James Bailey. I'm the videographer here.
Typically the guy behind the camera.
Not this time, though.
Today, you're in front of it. Am I recording? I can't even tell. Yeah, it is recording. I'm not wearing my glasses. And you know what? For fun, we're going to leave this in for you guys to experience.
I don't even see where you tell it was recording.
It's in the bottom left-hand corner. I
see it. It's there.
It's because I'm wearing a red shirt and it's covering over the red.
Oh,
okay.
That's what it is.
So there's a little method behind the magic. There's literally no one behind the camera. It is us in front of it.
Because I'm right here.
So in this message, we're going to be discussing 1 Corinthians 2, 1 through 5, the idea of fearless about sharing your faith. Question number 1 I want to talk through with you guys. What in life are you most passionate about, and what things do you find yourself telling people the most about? Kind of helps you to define that. What you're passionate about, you can easily define by what you talk a lot about.
Sure.
James, let's start with you.
I think for me, I'm a movie guy. I love movies. I love watching trailers. And as soon as there's a new trailer out, I'm like, dude, you catch that trailer? I'm always about movies. So I could see that being probably something that if I were to ask someone else, they'd say that's what I was most passionate about.
Absolutely. Rockin'. Jessica?
For me, I would say, this is going to sound funny, but sleep.
Sure.
That's
a good one. I would have changed mine.
I like to get my sleep. I like my naps.
Yes.
So I'm very passionate about that. Sounds funny, but...
I was missing it 2 nights ago. I only got 5 hours. Our 8-month-old, she's just we put her to bed too early. That was our mistake. And so then by 5 o'clock, she was up. And so then what did I do? I watched a movie.
Outstanding.
There you go.
The two. My passion is Jesus, obviously.
Okay.
You made us look bad. Thanks.
But seriously, though, it is Disneyland and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If you're around me long enough, you would see one of those two things and probably think of me. So that's for sure something that I'm overly addicted to. Easy for me to talk about. Take a moment, pause the video, and discuss as a group. Maybe point out your neighbor, hey, no, this is for sure yours. It's what you wear all the time. It's what you talk about all the time. Don't deny it. So take a moment and do that. All right, looking at the next section, focus on the passage. Question number 2 says this. Read 1 Corinthians 2, 1 through 5. I'm going to take a moment and do that for you guys. And I, when I came to you, brothers, did not come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom. For I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling. And my speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and power, so that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. Question 2 goes on to say, as Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, he is giving credit to whom for providing the way to salvation for them. And the quick and simple answer for that is the power of God and not the wisdom of his own words. And question number 3, James is going to take us into that. It's going to help us.
Yeah, sure. So what does Paul mean when he says, right there in verse 2, for I have decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified? I think what Paul means is that Paul was a super capable guy.
Yeah.
And he was, by this point, he'd already done so much, within his works and within his faith. And so he's a very eloquent guy. He knows how to talk. He is a born preacher and a God-ordained preacher. But he's saying here, I came to you with a simple message. Mm-hmm. He's not using his own words. He's not fluffing it. He's not kind of creating this long kind of message with different things that he's picked up along the way. He's saying it is just this, Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I think that simply means who Jesus is, the fact that he loves us, and what he did for us on the cross.
Yeah.
And so that kind of brings into another question. We talk about in verse 5 the wisdom of man against the power of God. how do the wisdom of man and the power of God differ? Aside the obvious, the power of God is infinite, I think that's just a cool question to mull over. What do you think that means? What do you think the implication is there? And especially where it comes to, with Paul bringing his message, what does it mean to not be in the wisdom of God? Or not be in the wisdom of man, but in the power of God? Cool. So hopefully you had some good conversation about that. I think one of the really cool things about this passage is Paul's being super vulnerable. Verse 3 says he's trembling with fear because he's worried about how this is going to come off. He's concerned because this is not his style. And so that kind of leads us into another question. What is hindering you in sharing with more people? What's stopping you from sharing your faith? What do you think?
For me, I would have to say it's just the idea of rocking the boat. I know that it's putting people off. When you share your faith, it's often because you have a different worldview and you have a different position on who Jesus is, and now you're intentionally sharing that with someone that thinks differently. And that's what can make it scary, is that like I'm a helper. I want to just do whatever I can to make things easier for someone else, but I know that sharing my faith doesn't necessarily do that for another person. Yes, it's awesome to know the Lord and to know that you have a one-way ticket into heaven, but on the flip side, you've got to really do some self-reflection and realize, man, my life isn't lining up with what the gospel says. My life isn't the way that God designed it to be. So that puts a fear in my heart of shaking people and almost inconveniencing people just like that. Yeah. What about you, Jessica?
I think it's just stepping out of my comfort zone. And taking that step of faith to actually bring up the conversation, because I don't know where that person may be in their life or in their faith. So just taking that step to put my flesh aside and actually worry about their spiritual well-being and trying to connect with them and get them to realize that, wow, you're right. What you have is different and I want that. So just really trying to put me aside and letting God work through what I'm saying and hoping that that's
good.
Yeah.
I think mine comes from the same place, in that, getting out of my own way almost. I'm always worried about what people think of me. I'm always worried about whether, I'm being funny. am I being funny? I'm worried right now if I'm being funny. I'm worried about whether I'm coming across right. And I think that gets in the way.
Yeah.
And I think, that's what Paul's saying here, verse 3. Yeah, I'm worried about getting in my own way here. So I'm just coming with this simple message.
Yep.
Love it. Take a second as a group, hit pause again, and mull it over, as it was. Right, James? Word?
That's
Dang
it.
I don't know English very well. Just take a moment, talk about the group. What is it that hinders you from sharing your faith with people? Taking a look at the next section, interpret the passage. Question number 7 says this: does Paul discredit persuasive and passionate teaching entirely? Quick answer, no. Take a moment to look over Paul's method of sharing the gospel in Acts 26. In Acts 26, Paul is standing before King Agrippa, and it's there that he doesn't say, hey, listen, Jesus died for your sins, and then walk away. Instead, he actually takes 11 verses there, and he focuses on what God has done for Israel, for those people throughout history. And then from verses 12 to 32, he shares his own testimony. He talks about what it is that God did personally in his own life. So he gets a little poetic. He gets very persuasive and illustrative in the language that he's using before them, being intentional with that moment. So not only is he relying on God's power to carry through in that moment, but also he is sharing a little bit of his own wisdom, a little bit of his own experience when it comes to it. I got this cool little quote to also share with you guys. Barclay is a theologian, and he says this: Corinth put a premium on the veneer of false rhetoric and thin thinking. So for this reason, that's why Paul is taking the approach that he did with Corinth, because they valued wisdom. They wanted to be wowed by how you could speak and the way that you could persuade them. So instead, he denied that and only gave them what the gospel is. And then this is also said in 1 Corinthians 1:22. He already knew, Paul, the Jews requested a sign and the Greeks sought after wisdom. So for this reason, he didn't care, and he simply chose to preach Christ crucified. isn't that kind of crazy how wise that Paul was being by not leaning on his own wisdom? Take a moment, pause this video, speak as a group, open up with one another. What do you value most about the life that we see being lived out by Paul, specifically in this section?
Take this next passage into your life. Let's go into this next section. Question number 8. How can we depend more on God's power and less on our own strength and wit? It's a tough one. It's so easy to go on our own strength and think that, oh, we got this and we can do it and it's all going to be through me. But ultimately, it's through God's power, and God gives us the words to speak, and we just are the vessel that he's using to declare the message and to proclaim the gospel. So we really do need to pray, seek wisdom when we are learning to talk or trying to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
So it's easier said than done. It's a very hard thing, and it's a daily thing to remember that we have to put ourselves aside and trust God.
Yeah. Be ready for any situation that people may have questions, and do so with wisdom, not a worldly, persuasive language wisdom as much as it is, what is the situation? Does the situation call for me to call out every biblical reference that I know to show them the way of salvation? Or is this a love the person with my life and show them what Jesus has truly done in our heart?
Totally.
Take a second, hit pause on the video, and share maybe a time that you depended on your own effort to see someone come to the saving knowledge of Christ versus, God doing the work. You try to do the work for God. Take a moment and chat about that. Moment, pray for God to reveal people in your life that you've been afraid to minister to. If you're willing, please share with the group so you can pray together for strength, courage, and reliance upon God's Spirit. We sort of took that moment between us just a second ago, and I realized that people that I'm afraid most to minister to is my own family. I shared that a few weeks ago in one of these life group videos, and just that, that idea of not wanting to rock the boat, not wanting to be an inconvenience to them or tell them what they're doing wrong. And so that's been a people that I've been fearful to minister to.
Totally. And I think, like I mentioned a little earlier, my issue is always that I get in my own way. I'm too worried about whether I'm funny. I'm too worried about whether I'm speaking well. And it's a really scary thought, but there could be hundreds of people that I could so easily have ministered to, but didn't because I was concerned about how they were going to view me.
Yeah.
And that's scary because we're talking about people's destinies. We're talking about, people's lives. And that's a really scary thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we need to not worry so much as to what our relationship's going to look like or our friendships are going to look like after we share the faith with them, share what God's done in our lives. I think it's more important that we do.
Yes.
Totally.
The challenging connecting piece, too, that I want to mention is that at the beginning, question number 1, we talked about what are you most passionate about. It's that thing that you just easily start firing off the facts and start telling people because you're so excited and you want them to experience the joy you get from that movie. Yeah. You want them to experience the same fulfilling sleep that you get. Whatever that thing is, there's just no holding you back in sharing that. But the moment it becomes about our faith, then we start holding ourselves back. And I think that might be more of the enemy, honestly, than probably of ourselves, because you'll show it that you don't have a problem sharing something. It's just a matter of sharing your faith. So take a moment, answer that question together, think about those people, pray for that strength and that confidence to realize my faith is real, Jesus is real, and because of that, I'm not going to be ashamed in sharing it. Thank you guys. Take a moment. Our word of the year here at Shelter Cove is fearless. If this is or isn't your church, we do just want to challenge you with that thought to just jump into your faith without fear to whatever God has called you to do. If it's sharing your faith with others, if it's starting something new, if it's not focusing on the negative people in your life, whatever that is, trust in God, know that He's with you, and we love you guys.
Yeah.
See you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.